All right, so let's go ahead and do a review of tipped employees. First off, what does that mean? If I'm a tipped employee, I regularly what?
Receive $20 more.
Yeah, was it 20 or 30? 30 a month. I regularly get $30 or more a month in tips. Okay. Second caveat, it doesn't pertain to Montana at all. How come?
Because of our minimum wage.
Yeah, you've still got to pay somebody $8.05 an hour in the state of Montana, regardless of whether they're tipped or not. Okay, so when we're talking about this, we're actually not talking about Montana law, are we? Next question. How much is federal minimum wage regularly? $7.25. Uh-oh, did I not calibrate? Hold on a sec, sorry. What's going on here? Well, we could listen to some music instead. Not really sure where that came from. Or that. And here's me. All right, let me try this one more time. Sorry about that. Oh, is it? Huh. Well, let's, I don't know what let's do. Let's reload it and calibrate it. And I'll just talk while we're doing this. So regular federal minimum wage is $7.25. What's minimum tipped wage? $2.13 an hour. So off the top of your heads, can you take those numbers times 40 hours and kind of remember how much do I need to make if I make federal minimum wage in total, and how much do I need to make if I make minimum tipped wage in total? One more time. Somebody say something. There we go. So if I work 40 hours a week, I've got to make $290, right? If I make minimum tipped wage, I've got to make, was it $85.20? Okay. So stick with me here. Regardless of, say I, work the roulette table in the special private back room at the Mirage in Vegas, and I make $2,500 a week in tips. How much does the Mirage have to pay me? Always. Oh, I'm not going to want to deal with this today, I can tell you that. Thank you. So what does an employer have to check to make sure to determine if 85.20 is sufficient? In other words, in that case, when I'm making $2,500 a week, they don't have to do a calculation. You can see that I'm making $290 a week, right? Because in total, this is what I've got to make regardless, right? What if I told you my tips were $260 or $240? Then do you have a concern?
Yes,
Why?
because they have to make up the 290.
Right, so the calculation is,
But you have to give them 85.20, so they're over 290.
is that greater or lesser than 290? Okay, so I'm still not worried, right? Because they've made more than 290. Then I tell you my tips were $92. Right? So my next question is, what does the employer have to pay this person for his or her weekly gross wages? What's the math? Just the quick algebraic statement. What would I have to pay her? What minus what?
290 minus 290 minus 85 or minus 92.
Yeah. That's it. That's the math right there. I've got to get to 290 bucks. I've got to pay you $85.20. The first piece of math I have to do is, do I get to 290? The other example we did, 2,500 bucks was my tips plus 85.20. That's over 290 bucks. If you do that piece of math, what do you pay them? $85.20, right? And I mean, honestly, in this day and age, I don't know where you're going to be getting tips less than, roughly $204.80 a week in 40 hours. Okay, everyone got this?
Where'd you come up, what's the 92?
Tips.
Oh.
Tips. These are every single one of these. That was my tips. My tips. My tips. So your first calculation is, are my tips plus my wages more or less than 290? If they're more than 290, no big deal. Here's the paycheck. Here's the paycheck. In this case, here's the paycheck. Yeah? Can we move on? Okay. Keep asking questions.
Wait, so if they are greater than 290?
Then you've got no issue just paying the minimum tipped wage, 213 times 40. But you've got to make all darn sure that between the tips and the wages, you've got your person at minimum wage. Okay? All right, so we left off calculating salaried non-exempt employees' paychecks. What's a non-exempt employee? What's a non-exempt employee?
It's a person who works for somebody else and it's minimum wage.
It's these guys.
Oh.
You are non-exempt if you're anything other than this. You're not a professional, you're not a creative person, you're not a computer professional, you're not an executive, you're not an administrator. And it doesn't matter what title you give them. It depends upon what's their qualifications, what's their discretionary power, can they hire and fire, do they train, do they make decisions, do they manage their own inventory, things like that, right? If you're somebody that doesn't fit any of these categories, you are considered a what? Non-exempt employee. If you don't fit one of these categories, you're non-exempt. Okay, I'm non-exempt from what? Overtime. I'm not exempt from overtime. You can't put me on salary and give me a title if it's not, doesn't have the meat of one of these things, and then work me overtime and not pay it, right? So that's what we're working on. How do I pay my non-exempt salaried people? And we did.
Exempt just means they're not subject to overtime.
Exempt means they're not subject to overtime, and that means that I put you on salary, I pay you $1,500 a week, and if it takes you 70 hours to get your job done, that sucks for you. Okay, got a whole nother slew of issues surrounding morale and burnout, but I'm talking from purely a Fair Labor Standards Act perspective, no big, right? So we did example 1, and we did example 2. And just to reiterate what the bullets are, what's bullet number 1 where I took the wage times 12? That's called annualizing your salary. In step number 2, you're finding their regular what? Gross paycheck. They put what I wrote as bullet 3, they put it into 2 different bullets. when we found the regular hourly rate, how did we do that again?
We divide the 24,000 divided by 2,000.
Yes, ma'am. When we did this, we didn't do it in 2 steps. And I'm not gonna go into the reason why not, but I'll just believe me when I say that it's easier to do it my way. Okay, 24,000 was my annual salary divided by what?
2,000.
Number of hours in the work year. And 2,080 hours came from what? 52 weeks times 40 hours. And I said, you can't just go throw in 2,080 because I'm not commissioned for a 2,080 hour work year. You would have to put in 1,560 down here. If you're, you only work, I don't know, summer months, 15 weeks, you'd put in whatever 15 times 40 is, right? 600 hours. Okay, so you get my point. So then you get your regular hourly wage. Overtime rate is whatever your regular hourly wage is times 1.5, right? And then what do I pay you? I pay you your regular semi-monthly gross paycheck, so you got to go back up there and grab that. And the number of hours at the overtime rate. Okay? That's where we left off, yeah? Okay. Now I'm going to put this up on the smart board and we're going to take a look at this guy. This is taking what we've been working with, and again, I want you to do the same thing we were practicing on Tuesday where you're writing down all your 5 formulas and labeling stuff. It's really important, particularly, obviously in the workplace, but for our purposes in here, when you test take, I need to see your labels so I can follow your work. So if you get one thing screwed up, you don't miss 5 points, you just miss 1, okay? So here's the situation with this person. I'm quoted a salary of $2,000 a month, and I'm non-exempt. But I work a 38-hour work week. Okay, I'm not commissioned for 40 hours a week. We live in LA, and I shut down my office at 3 o'clock every Friday because traffic's horrific, and I give my folks a jump on the weekend. So you don't work 40 hours a week for me, you work 38. So I technically start paying you overtime once you hit what? 38 hours a week. I pay you your regular hourly rate for anything between 38 and 40 hours. But then I have to go to time and a half over 40. Okay? So, 38 hours a week. I pay semi-monthly, which is how many times a year again?
24.
I pay semi-monthly. And in one semi-monthly time period, you reported 16 hours of overtime. But in this particular situation, you've got to figure out of those 16 hours, how many were between 38 and 40 and how many were over 40. So there was 4 hours of overtime, right? Because semi-weekly is about every other week. 4 hours overtime was between 38 and 40, and the other 12 hours was at 40 plus. Let's walk through this. Step number 1. Annualize the salary, write the formula out. Annualize the salary. That's my annual salary, right?
Oh, yeah.
Step number 2. Figure out my regular semi-monthly gross paycheck. I make 24 grand a year. How many times a year am I paid? many times a year am I paid? 24, and I know that because semi-monthly is 24 times a year. What would you divide by if I told you I'm paid bi-weekly? 26. What would you divide by if I told you I was paid weekly? Okay, so again, just to reiterate this, these two numbers here both came from the data, didn't they? How often is my salary quoted, and how often am I paid? So that's easy peasy. The next step is to do what? Calculate your hourly rate. Go back up to the annual salary and divide it by the number of hours I work in the work year and get me my hourly rate, and then get me my overtime rate. And you know how many hours a week I work, and you know how many weeks there are in the year. So get me my regular hourly rate and get me my overtime rate, please. So what did you divide the 24,000 by? What is that 38 times 52?
1976.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. I thought it was more of a 1900 number.
How did you get that?
Well, how do you get the number of hours in a work year?
Well, it's 2000.
That's only if you work what?
40.
Yeah. Do I work 40 hours? No. So figure out your denominator, get me your hourly wage. One more time.
I got a small number for the hourly rate.
It's got to make sense. What is your number?
12
That doesn't make sense. So then you got to go back and redo your math.
12.15 maybe.
Okay. Did anybody else get 12.15? Okay. Carlos brought up a good point. If your answer is $1.21, it's like I've screwed up, so you've got to go redo your math. Where's your error?
Well, I got 1976, but it's 2400 divided by 1976.
2,400.
4,000, yeah. Divided by.
You didn't do 24,000. You did 2,400. So you guys, if you get a number that doesn't make sense, just run it on your calculator again. It doesn't stop you in your tracks. You just do it again. So I'm 1960. Is that the number of hours?
76.
$12.15. So you should very easily now be able to get the overtime rate. Oh, it's inevitable. Overtime is 1.5 times the regular rate. It's going to be 18 something, 1822 or something. 19 what?
1822.
That's what I would get in my head. But my head isn't what it used to be, so I will always cop to the fact that I could be way off.
Is it best to go out 4 decimals and round up from there and to come up with?
Yeah,
the-
do traditional
So
rounding.
it's 1823.
Oh, yeah, sure it would be.
It's 18.2186.
So did I.
Okay, first off, I could care less. I don't want to spend 2 seconds with class time with it. I will never, ever count you off. You know, I come up with 18.225, that rounds to 18.23. Okay. Now, the last question is, how much is the paycheck? So I know that she gets what? What's her baseline? $1,000. Plus, she gets 4 extra hours at what amount? Regular rate. Plus, she gets another 12 hours at what rate? Overtime. So just write out the algebraic equation. You've got a number plus something in parentheses plus something in parentheses. $1,000 plus she gets so many hours of something plus so many hours of something. $1267.36, yeah?
Yep.
How did you get 4 hours at the regular rate?
So up here, Carlos, because she only is commissioned for 38 hours a week, when she reports overtime, I've got to have 2 staggered rates because between the 38 and 40, I only pay her the regular rate. But once she hits 40, I have to pay her according to the FLSA time and a half. And a semi-weekly period's about 2 weeks. So if she works 16 hours of overtime, one of the weeks, 2 hours plus 4, 2 hours plus 6, right? 2 hours between 38 and 40 and then 6 over. And then the next week's 2 hours between 38 and 40 and 6 over. And I have to tell you that, and I did. Of the 16 hours of overtime in one pay period, only 12 of those were over 40 hours. Right? 4 hours were between 38 and 40.
2 per week.
Yep. And the other 12 were 40 plus. So I've got to pay her at 2 different rates.
So if you weren't told that, you would just do the overtime times how many hours?
No, because when you work less than 40 hours, I know that some of your quote-unquote overtime is going to be between, 36 and 40, or 38 and 40. Because you can't get to 40 until you've gotten those other hours, right?
For the 16, I guess, if she
Does
works.
that make sense? You can't get to more than 40 hours a week.
Yeah.
If you're only, so if I said to you, I want to hire you and I want you to work Monday through Thursday, 8 hours a day. How many hours a week am I commissioning?
Yeah, she has to make it that 4 hours.
32, right? 4 times 8. So if you told me, Lisa, I worked 10 hours of overtime last week, how many hours would you have worked if I'm commissioning you for 32? 42.
So you're only paid for 2.
Well, I've got to pay you
4
between the
hours,
32 and
36
40, and I'm going to pay you your regular hourly rate. And that's overtime, right? But once you hit the 40, I've got to pay you time and a half according to Fair Labor Standards. Does everyone understand that?
Every week.
Okay. Uno mas. Let's see, what does this one tell me? Blah, 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 35. Okay. So this one says 35 and 1600. This one says I am a non-exempt employee and I'm quoted a salary of 1600 a week, or a month, excuse me. But we only work 7 hours a day in my company. So I've got a 35-hour work week. And I'm paid semi-monthly. And again, in one pay period, I record 16 hours of overtime. Of the 16 hours of overtime, how many of those hours are going to be between 35 and 40? 10. Okay, I'll give you a couple minutes to solve this on your own. Do the 5 bullets. If you want me to come sit by you, or 6, sorry. If you want me, wait, let me make sure that's the facts. Yeah. If you want me to come sit by you and watch you, I'm happy to do that. Does anybody want me to come hang out with them? And don't ever be embarrassed to say yes, please. PowerPoint chapter 2. Okay, so step 1, let's all say it together. I've got to do what? Annualize the salary. How much is that? What times what?
1,600 times 12.
And why did you use 12? And we've been doing that too much. I need to try another one where we have a different quote. If I quoted your salary biweekly, what would you multiply that 1,600 by? 26. Good. Okay, so you get that. All right, so how much do I make a year?
19,200.
think I need to go update these slides. You really don't live on 19,200, do you? Okay, then step number 2 is what? Calculate my, yeah. How often am I paid? Semi-monthly, so that's 24 times a year, so that's going to give me my regular semi-monthly gross, right? Which is what? Regular gross paycheck. Step 3, calculate my hourly pay. You have to come back up to this number and divide by the number of hours in my work year. How many hours, Carlos, is in my work year? 1820. So what'd you get for an hourly wage? One more time. Does that make more sense? Are you satisfied with that answer? Okay. Connor, what do I have to do next?
Calculate overtime.
Yeah. And what times what equals what?
1055 times 1.5.
83.
1583.
Okay, Mallory, now I've got to put together my algebraic statement to bring together 3 things. What's the first thing we know that my guy gets? Yeah, of course, he always gets $800, right? Baseline. Plus what? Yes, ma'am. 10.55 is my regular hourly rate, and I worked 10 hours over a 2-week period between 35 and 40 hours, right? And then what's the last piece of that?
1583 times 5.
I think, didn't we end up saying it was 6?
Oh, was it 6?
Yeah, but I mean, it doesn't matter. What matters is you understand where the numbers go. Okay. And what did you get to? Anybody get that? Did you get that round, Joe? What'd you get?
For total,
Yeah.
$1,048.
1048 even? That number. $1,000.48. Okay, good. So, to recap, what have we learned? We've learned how to do non-exempt salaried people and just cut them a regular old paycheck. Most of us are commissioned for 40 hours a week, right? But if you're not, your overtime is paid at 2 different staggered rates. This also happens all the time where, hey, like, you work for a CPA firm and you're paid CPA rate, but you also, because you love gardening, you take care of their lawns and gardens. And then you work some overtime. So guess what? Are you getting paid overtime on your CPA rates or your gardening rates? So there's lots of people that are paid at a multitude of rates for different things, right? Okay. You need to go do this on your own. Example number 5, it's a reinforcement exercise. I'm not going to take class time. Okay, so if you're writing down assignments for Tuesday, go do example 5 in PowerPoint, chapter 2. Also prepare for the quiz on Tuesday while we're talking about what's happening on Tuesday. I'm going to give you a list of acronyms, and you're going to pick out the ones that you want to pick out. In other words, you're not going to have to do all of them. Acronyms are anything that's got the initials. What's the PDGC? What's OASDI? What's SSA? What's IRCA? I think I give you 10 and you choose like 5. For each of them, you need to tell me what the acronym stands for. And then as you can imagine, you're going to need to tell me what the significance of it is. It is not okay if you choose ADA to just say it's about disabled people. You need to say it was passed in the 90s that makes sure, or it ensures non-discrimination against disabled people and requires the employer to provide reasonable accommodation. In other words, those were the 2 big bullet points on that PowerPoint slide. You don't need to tell me all the little tiny details. I don't care. I don't have any, even though I wrote these things, I don't know what's buried 4 bullets deep. But I know that if I was explaining ADA to my employer or my board of directors or my advisory committee, I'd say, hey, we can't discriminate against disabled people and we need to provide reasonable accommodations so that they can work here. That's been around about 30 years. Those seem pretty important. Okay? In addition, you will need to completely replicate those tax tables from your head. And we've done that. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I don't know that I've got Moodle up. What am I talking about? When I say replicate the tax tables, what am I asking you to do? Yeah. And I just want to make sure everyone knows where it is. At this point, I think that I'd asked you to, I think I had asked you to print it and like laminate it or put it somewhere special or do something because we're going to refer to it a lot. Honestly, the reason, and I really, anybody that's ever had me, I'm mostly interested in you critically thinking and not interested in you memorizing stuff. But there's a few things that you really kind of full stop have to memorize in that it's just kind of the language of what we use. So it's these payroll tax tables 2017. You will need to replicate them just like it's written down there. I'm going to ask you for the caps. I mean, it's just going to be a blank piece of paper and you need to redo those. Okay. So no, it's not like a fill in the blank or multiple choice. You need to have it in your head and put it down on a piece of paper. And then I'll probably throw in an extra credit from what we've just been working on, examples 1 through 5. Okay, so that quiz is on Tuesday. It's 12 points plus a little bit of, maybe a couple points extra credit to do a wage problem. Okay, so next topic. The fun just keeps coming. Honestly, I'm not as concerned with this. It doesn't happen that much. There's enough math that I'm gonna kind of skip over this. And when I do that, when I'm like, this isn't important to me, you're not gonna see it on a test. I'm not gonna like skip over content in class and then throw you for a loop in the exam. You just don't see a lot of BLO plans. You don't see a lot of fluctuating work weeks. I want to focus on the things you do see a lot. This you see a lot. This is, I inspect timber, or logs, or rough cut, wood, and I get paid per board foot. Or I assemble, wind chimes, and I get paid for every wind chime that I assemble. Or I'm a quality assurance officer, and I get paid for every, wind turbine nacelle that I climb up and make sure that it's producing at optimal efficiency. It's piece rate. And it can be something like you get 8 cents a wind chime, or it can be something like you get $1,600 per, nacelle that you climb up and assure that it's operating at efficiency. So there's lots of different kinds of piece rates. You can pay anybody according to piece rate, but there's some rules according to the Fair Labor Standards Act. One of them is, and this isn't the guy climbing the wind towers, this is the gal or the guy that's putting together the wind chimes, you've also got to be paid for non-productive time. So that means I get there in the morning, I've got to get my workstation set up, I've got to pull my, orders for the day, I've got to get my line started, whatever. That's non-productive time. In other words, wind chimes aren't going in front of me, but I've still got to be paid for that. Okay. Secondly, when you add it all together, you've got to make sure you're paying $7.25 an hour, or in Montana, $8.05 an hour. Right? So you can pay in piece rate, no problem, but you got to get to minimum wage, obviously. Okay, so the key here is there's 2 ways to calculate piece rate according to the law, and they don't give you the same result. But hint, they should be very, very close. If the numbers aren't very, very close, then there's something wrong. As an employer, you're going to choose method A or method B, and then you're going to stick with it. Okay, you can't vacillate back and forth. I I can walk you through the words, but it's way easier to just do the math to illustrate the examples. So if you're somebody that does well looking at words rather than numbers, here's method A, and that is based upon making, I'm not even gonna, I have a hard time explaining the words. It's easier to do it with numbers. But method A is you figure out how much you earn in total, divide it by the number of hours, and then tack on a 0.5 for anything made in overtime. This one, method B, is different in that it gives you two different rates. You're paid your regular piece rate for everything that you do the first 40 hours, and you're paid your piece rate times 1.5 for anything you do over 40 hours. So mathematically, they're going to give you different answers. Here's the first one. I'm an inspector, and I inspect, let's say I work in Port Angeles, Washington, and I inspect oyster beds. They're on, these sort of rock pallets that they plant the seeds on. So for every pallet I inspect, I get paid 12 cents. And in 1 week, I inspected 4,812 pallets, and it took me 47.25 hours to do that. And of those 4,812 pallets, 600 of them were inspected after the 40 hours. So how many were inspected in the first 40 hours? 4,212, the difference, right? So 4,212 in the first 40 hours, 600 after that. And we want to use both methods. So the first method, I'm going to say this to you, and you're going to translate, hopefully, my words into an algebraic statement. So the first thing I want you to do is to figure out how much in total does he get for all 4,812 units at his piece rate. How much does he get? Write down an algebraic equation. How much does he get for all 4,812 units at his piece rate? So that is what is Mustafa's earnings for just his regular piece rate? 24 cents? Ugh. Oh, why am I having such a hard time with this? Okay. So is that what I can just pay him? Why isn't that good enough? Yeah, he works 7.25 hours of overtime. I've somehow got to get in some additional compensation for that. Step 2. Figure out how much this equates to on an hourly basis. So if he's earning that for the entire 47.25 hours, how much am I paying him as a base pay for every hour he works? If he made that all week with all of his overtime, how much am I paying him for a base rate for all of his hours? How many hours did it take him to make that? 47.25. So I got to divide by all the hours. Okay, so now I do my first scan, don't I? And I'm like, oh, am I paying a minimum wage? Yeah, so I feel good about that. What do I need to do now? Can anybody see what he has to get in addition to his $577? He's made $12.22 for each of those hours, what do I have to tack on? So here's the 1.0, I just need to tack on the 0.5. In other words, I need to give him his overtime premium for the last 7.25 hours. I'm already paying him $12.22 an hour, right? We just saw that. What do I need to give him in addition to that? Yeah. I need to figure out what the 0.5 is, in other words, the tack on. And how many hours does he get that for? 7.25 hours of overtime. Good. So let's figure out the premium first. And let's label that overtime Go ahead.
Why do you do just the 0.5?
Because I've already seen for the entire 47.25 hours, he's gotten 12.22. So now I just need to tack on the 0.5, and that makes it 1.5.
Wait, how?
Because I divided this by 47.25 hours. So that means that he's made $12.22 an hour for those whole 47.25 hours. So anything over 40, I just need to tack on that 0.5 to make it 1.5. Now, what's the key word here that's kind of a new word? Premium. This is not, 611 is not his overtime rate. 611 is his overtime premium, the tack on to the base rate.
Just out of curiosity, since there's different ways you can do this, you have the overtime premium, then you have standard overtime, one being 1.5, the other being 0.5.
Mm-hmm.
Would you actually put that on a test for us to differentiate between the two?
Could, because the standard overtime rate and an overtime premium are not the same number.
And that's why I'm asking, because I figured like that.
Yeah, and when I get, that's a really good question, Daniel, when I go out of my way to be like, pay attention to this verbiage, that's like, yeah, this is an important concept.
Just making sure.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, most businesses, they can do one way or the other. That's what
Mhm.
makes it right.
So how are you gonna put this all together? One more formula. He gets paid that first number, right? Plus you gotta tack on something. Alex, what do you gotta tack on?
611 times the 7.25.
That's exactly right. You gotta tack on $6.11 an hour times the last 7.25 hours. Very good. Which puts us right there. And again, we've got the same word.
Could you get the same results just by figuring the last 600 units were paid?
No, it's gonna give you a different number. And that's what we're gonna do in method B. Okay, so now let's go do method B. I'm sorry, did everybody understand the end of that one?
What was the total amount?
621.76? 74, 621.74. Okay, method B, super easy, which is basically what you're talking about. How much did I produce in the first 40 hours? How many units did I produce in the first 40 hours? Yeah, and how much do I pay him for that? Plus, how many units did I produce in overtime? Yep, and how much do I have to pay him for that? That's method B. I get 12 cents for the first set of units, and I get 12 cents times 1.5 for anything that I made in overtime. Unit B is super duper easy. It's going to give you a number very close to method A, but not the same as method A because obviously they're not mathematically similar.
How do you know what you use?
Whichever the employer tells you. You've got to choose one and stick with it. So it's Totally, you would not be as a staff accountant making that decision. You would be told, here's how we run payroll. And the payroll fields would all be set up to accept that. In method A, I don't care what you produced in overtime, do I? We didn't even use that 600 in method A. So work the numbers and tell me what you got.
613.48.
Is that close to method A?
It's off by $7.07.
7%. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. All right, I'm going to give you one more of these to work on your own, method A and method B. Now I've got Rosine, and she is inspecting seedlings of bonsai for a wholesale landscaper. She's making sure all the bonsai seeds are planted adequately. In 1 week, she inspects 6,897 small seedlings. It took her 43 and a half hours to do that. And of the 6,897, 423 of those were inspected in overtime. Calculate overtime using both methods. Okay. Just need a couple more minutes. Yeah. So, let's walk through the words to go with the numbers. The first step, method A, how much does Rosine make in total for checking the little bonsai seedlings? $551.76 for the whole week. How many hours did it take her to earn that? And I will tell you, half of you will miss that on the exam. You'll divide by 40. She did not work 40 hours. She worked 43.5 hours. You have got to divide her total earnings by how many hours it took her to earn it. Okay? I've given the same test since roughly the same test since 1999, and statistically, half of you will miss that on the exam. So you might want to put on your notes, I don't want to miss this on the exam. Because then obviously everything's wrong from there on, isn't it? So she makes $12.68 an hour. I have to do my scan, make sure she makes minimum wage. Of course she does. Why? Can somebody articulate for me why I'm only multiplying by 0.5? This is kind of a tough one to say. Go ahead.
That's the premium over our hourly rate.
Right, so where's our hourly rate?
Divided by the hours worked.
Yeah, she's making $12.68 an hour. I see that because I divided by every single hour she worked. So for every hour, whether it's 40 or 400, I get an hourly rate. All I need to do is tack on the 0.5 for anything over 40. Does anybody feel like they still need clarification on that? This is the second place students will go wrong. You'll still multiply that dang thing by 1.5. Don't do that. Now you're paying her 2.5 because she's already got the 1.0 right here. And then really, if you understand all this, it's easy to put it together. She gets her regular gross wages plus the extra $6.34 an hour for the last 3.5 hours. And this one, piece of cake, you just pay her 12 cents for the units she made. In overtime, literally the only math you have to do here is how did I get to 64.74? Yeah, I took she had 6,897 units in total. She made 423 of those after the 40 hours, so obviously the difference is what she made during the first 40. Okay? And then you do a scan and you go, it's 568.68, pretty close to 573.95. Yep. I feel pretty good about it. Shouldn't be off by more than, a couple percentage points. Okay. What time we got? Oh, that clock's right now. How late do we go?
140?
50 or 40?
50, sorry.
Awesome. Go ahead. No, method A is not always more than method B. What this does, what method B does, is it incentivizes, I think it sends a counter signal to your employees. What does it tell me to do my first 40 hours? Yeah, you want to make 8 cents a bonsai plant or 12 cents a bonsai plant? So the first 40 hours I kind of hang low, and then I kick into major overdrive. That is not the message you want to send your employees, right? So it depends upon what those numbers are. Method A is not always more than method B. Okay, special incentive plans. These are honestly, you can design these any way that you want. This is, and it's a little bit of old school, like, I don't know, 50s and 60s and even into the 70s where it's just, you want people to work harder and produce more. But then what we found from that model, which is essentially when American manufacturing started to dissipate, is that we were turning out a whole bunch of stuff, but they were, they were 10 and 20% defect rates, right? And we learned from our Japanese and Singaporean and Taiwanese counterparts, the quality really matters. So these special incentive programs are just pumping it out as fast as you can. That's gone a little bit the way of the dinosaur. But nonetheless, you will still see it in different, in different kinds of organizations where it's appropriate. So what they're basically talking about here is I do want you to produce more. In my mind, you've always got to have that married with some sort of QC or defect analysis program to make it, valid. So all that really does, and again, this is just an example, but the math is pretty, self-explanatory. If you make up to 2,000, proverbial widgets this week, I give you 18 cents a widget. And then for anything you do between these two numbers, I amp it up to 24 cents. And over this, I amp it up to 36 cents. So, I can put up 1 million of these. You should be able to do the math pretty easily on those. Yeah? I don't think I even have an example of it. Does anybody need an example of this, or do you get it? You okay? Commissions. Commissions is the same. I can set it up any way that I want. You can get base plus commission. You can get straight commission. You can have a graded commission system. I can do whatever I want as long as I'm sure you're making minimum wage, right? So I think I do have an example of one of these. Yeah. Okay. So let's. Okay. So this guy gets base plus commission. And he gets $30,000 a year salary, base wage. And he gets also paid for anything he sells over quota. What does that mean?
It means he gets a certain percentage of of the amount that he makes, or of each item that's sold, he gets a certain percentage.
No, because his sales were 40,000, but you got to ask me something else.
Once he sells more than expected, he gets a piece of the action.
Yeah, expected. That's a good replica or replacement for the word quota. He's expected. Let's say that he sells tractor parts, and baseline is you don't really get to keep your job if you don't do 31.5 a year in sales. And he did 40. And he's paid biweekly. Calculate his paycheck. Now, how many times a year is he paid if he's paid biweekly again? 26. So 25 times a year he just gets a regular paycheck. We're calculating the one where we throw in the commission. So there's two pieces to it. It's the base wage and then it's his commission. 30,000 divided by what is his regular gross paycheck? 26, right? He's paid 26 times a year, so that's his just regular old gross. Does he get 2% on the full 40 grand?
No.
No, he doesn't even get to keep his job. Being a little dramatic, but he's expected to do 31.5. So that's how you incent people to go over quota. So he gets 2% of 8,500 plus his base salary, right? 1323.85.
What's the difference between the 30 and the 31?
The 30,000 is just what I'm paying you. That's your quoted salary,
So he gets that.
regardless. Yeah, come sell tractor parts for me, please, Kelsey, and I'm going to pay you $30,000 a year to do that. I expect you to sell 31,500 of tractor parts to even keep your job.
Okay.
And anything you do over that, I'll give you 2%. Keep clarifying. Good questions. Everyone get that? Anybody remember what a non-discretionary bonus is? Versus a discretionary bonus? No, don't read to me off the slide.
Vacation time?
No, it's not vacation.
If it's non-discretionary, I feel like everyone gets.
Yeah, non-discretionary bonus that's written right into your contract or my union agreement or your employment contract or whatever, that, you know, once I do revenue of X, or once we achieve efficiency of Y, or once we achieve a defect level of Z, everybody gets, you know, fill in the blank, 1% of your gross salary. In your pension, in stock options, in cash, whatever. Okay? So what they're telling us here is if you know what your non-discretionary bonuses are, I mean, in other words, if it's a calculable amount, when you calculate overtime for people, you have to put the non-discretionary bonus into their hourly rate before you calculate their overtime, because it's really a part of their compensation. Because non-discretionary means you can't change it. So it is part of their comp. So you do have to use it for calculating overtime. Okay, so let's walk through this. So basically this is saying I got a guy named Jamil that works for me. He makes $13.50 an hour. And I have safety performance non-discretionary bonuses. If you achieve, you know, less than a 1% injury rate over the last quarter, everybody gets, you know, $85. And they did. So in this week, he worked 44 hours. Most of us would just go up to the $13.50 to calculate the overtime rate. Can we do that? No. You have to come down here and say, okay, yeah, he made $13.50 times 44 hours, plus the $85 he made $679. So if I divide that by 44 hours, I get his regular rate, and that's what I have to calculate the overtime on. Am I using an overtime rate or an overtime premium in this example? Yep, good, great, you saw that right away. Do you want me to put one of these up on the board to try them? Yeah, okay, I'm happy to do that. We've got some time. You guys are actually pretty quick studies. Sometimes I don't get through this chapter 2 in 2 sessions. So you're crunching the numbers out and you're smiling and nodding, which makes me think that you know what you're doing. If you're smiling and nodding and you don't have a clue what's going on, that is not the body signals to be sending me.
What if the bonus is cash?
Doesn't matter. Fair market value. Okay, so with the performance efficiency bonus. Calculator gross for 1 week. I pay her $12 an hour. She worked 49 hours and she got a performance efficiency bonus of $100. Okay, what do we got? What do I divide the 688 by? The entire amount it took me to earn that. Very good. Now what? Okay, good. And what do you want to call that, Carlos? If you were labeling that, what would you identify that as? That's my what? That 702 is my premium. Katie, what does your algebraic statement look like to pay him his final check here?
Total of 688 plus your 702 times 9.
Excellent. 9 hours of overtime, $7.02 premium. Yep, that's what I got. Good. You guys are doing great. I think I've only got one more concept for you. Any questions on this? Non-discretionary bonuses.
Where do you, oh, you get the 9
9 hours, yep. Did you know there was so much to think about with payroll?
No.
You have to memorize these formulas?
It's not so much memorize as it's just understanding how the numbers work.
You just plug and play.
Plug and play. Yeah, that's what you do. And then you got to do a vetting for reasonableness. Right? Does that make sense?
We gotta see it, yeah.
So are profit sharing discretionary or non-discretionary? Well, that was a loaded question. They can really be either. If it's written into your comp plan, then it's non-discretionary. If I run a car dealership and I take a look at my profit and loss for 2016 and I had a banner year and I write myself $200,000 bonus check and I still got $500,000 sitting in my account, I'm like, wow, you guys did that for me. I'm going to share my profit with you. So that's a discretionary bonus. What's a profit sharing bonus? And I can do that any way that I want. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of, this is where strategy comes in. If I give you cash, okay, that's great. Who doesn't love cash? But it's fully taxable, right? as compensation. And it shows up on your W-2 and all that good stuff. And I'm not incenting you to do what? Are they really incenting you to stay with me? If I've got some sort of like a phantom stock program or a stock option or an ESOP, an employee stock option program, I would make a strong case that I should put your bonus or your profit sharing payout into that, because that's going to keep you more tied to my company if it's buying into the stock of my company. At any rate, there's a lot of different ways to do it. Nonprofits don't have a profit, so you're very rarely going to see this kind of a plan, obviously, in the nonprofit, like a United Way, or, like we don't get profit sharing at the university. Okay. We do, however, get a chicken dinner at Christmas. It's a pretty big deal. Okay, so have a great weekend and be safe.